G'day and welcome to the Drive Able podcast. My name is Brad Williams and over there is Ali Akbariam, who today we are talking to a health professional, a neuro-ophthalmologist by the name of Professor Celia Chen. We're talking to her about eye conditions that impact on driving, especially the neurological ones, like a brain injury that impacts on visual fields. I can't wait to get into it. Professor Celia Chen is a clinical professor with the University of South Australia and consultant in the neuro-ophthalmology and clinical specialist at Flinders University. She completed her neuro-ophthalmology fellowship at the Wilmer Eye Institute at the Johns Hopkins Hospital. So she comes with us to us with a heap of experience. She's in Adelaide with me in South Australia. I've got lots of working experience with Celia. She's been in many articles, research articles, leading journal reviews. She's raised over $800,000 in funding for the prestigious Australian National Health and Medical Research Council. Dr. Chen is dedicated to providing mentorship and learning opportunities for young ophthalmologists in the Asia and Pacific region. Basically, she's a gun in this field of neuro-ophthalmology, and I can't wait to get this interview underway.
Very excited about this one. And
yeah, let's get into it as soon as we can. Let's go.
Let's do it.
Welcome to the Drive Able podcast, where each episode you get to listen to two of Australia's leading professionals in the area of driving and community mobility for people with disabilities. In each episode, they interview drivers, carers, and industry experts and share the insider's guide to driving with a disability. Here are your hosts, Brad and Ali.
Hi everybody, I'm really excited to get into today's interview, but before we get started, we just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors that make this show possible, Mobility Engineering and Williams OT. This show takes a lot of time and money to put together, and we just want to say thanks to our sponsors for helping you bring this podcast today. And today we have Associate Professor Celia Chen, who is an eye specialist. Celia, g'day, how are you?
Good, thank you.
That's good. Can we start by asking you to introduce yourself and give us a little bit of your background?
No problem. Yes. So my name is Celia. I am a clinical professor in ophthalmology with UniSA, and I'm an ophthalmologist by trade, eye specialist. I know it's a bit of a mouthful. My background is I am an Adelaide girl. I completed my medical training and then proceeded to finishing my ophthalmology specialist degree in Australia, Adelaide. And then I went to America at Johns Hopkins Hospital, where I did a neuro-ophthalmology fellowship. And this is to do with conditions that connect the eye to the brain, basically. So I'm a neuro-ophthalmologist, which is my passion and my special interest.
Yeah, fantastic. And as a driver trained OT, we're completely transparent. Celia and I have a lot of clients in common in regards to this, and we know that a lot of driver-trained OTs may be really interested in this podcast. So if you know a driver-trained OT, make sure you share this podcast with them so they can learn from Celia as well. It's great to have you on board. It's going to be, well, we hope that it's going to be a great interview, but it's also fantastic for the people that might have an eye condition to listen into this one. So if you've got an eye condition and you're thinking about returning to driving, especially if it's a neurological condition, so something that's impacted the brain, we're going to ask lots of questions about what that means and how it works with licensing and things like that. So make sure you tune in and share it with the people that you might know. So Celia, let's unpack it a little bit more. What are the differences between the different areas of eye specialty, like from an optometrist, which I saw yesterday in regards to getting a new prescription for my glasses, through to ophthalmology and especially neuro-ophthalmology?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, that's a great question, and I get asked that all the time. What's the difference between optometry and ophthalmology? An easy way to think about it is that optometrist has a great job. They deal with healthy eyes, and they help to optimize their vision optically. Whereas ophthalmologists, we deal with eye conditions where the eye has something happen to it, and so we then try to deal with the condition. My husband always jokes and say he can't believe that the eye is so small and yet we have so many subspecialties. The way to think about it is that it's front to back. So there are quite a lot of subspecialist area just because it is a very intricate organ. An easy way to think about it is anterior segment, posterior segment, and far beyond, which is where I am. Anterior, so the way I tend to tell people is the eye is a bit like a camera. So you got the lens in the front. And not just the lens, you've also got this structure called the cornea and the lens. So they are the front of the eye. They are the lens, the glasses that help to send the light through. The back of the eye posterior segment is like the film in the camera that captures the image. Now, I think, we were ahead of digital age. So the way to think about our eye is like one of those digital cameras where you've got a camera, but you need a cable to send it through to the brain. And so that connection is where the neural part comes in. And so I think that's in a nutshell, the very different subspecialty areas, anterior segment, posterior segment, and further beyond neuro-ophthalmology.
So what conditions then are you mainly dealing with when we talk about that connection, that cable through to the brain? What conditions might you come across that especially may impact on driving?
Oh, that's a very big area. Look, I think what got me probably interested in neuro-ophthalmology is basically, let's just say the eye is the camera, the brain is the computer that actually then tells us what we see. Okay, so there are conditions in the brain that affect how we see things. For instance, after a stroke, in some people, they actually ignore half of the image, half of the area that they're seeing. So, and this can happen after, we call it acquired brain injury, such as after a stroke, after a brain surgery, after trauma, etc. So that's one very big area actually, which I think that's where Brad and I collaborate a lot with, because there's a legal ramification where you can imagine you do need to see a certain area so you can scan. You're not endangering yourself or other people on the road. But yet, if you only have half of the vision, you're ignoring half of the area. That can pose an issue. So definitely that's a very important neuro area that affects driving. And
so if you're listening to this as a client, the types of terminology that we're talking about for this from a very clinical point of view, do you want to go through some of those, Celia? Hemianopias and so forth?
Okay. Look, perhaps if we actually then think about, if I use the word legal driving criteria then, okay. So obviously in order to drive, you need to be able to see well enough for a certain amount. So there are two main criteria. One is called acuity, which is how well you can see things, how fine you can see things. And the second area is the area of vision, which is, at the moment, if someone's coming towards you from the right-hand side, are you going to see that, or are you going to ignore them until they are right in front of you? So the first terminology is called visual acuity, how well you can see. The second terminology is visual field, which is the area of vision. Okay. And so the first part, the visual acuity, and that's where, as I said, if you think about the eye front to back, okay, if you have something that's blocking your vision, such as a scar in the cornea, then it's like you got a scratch glass, then you can't see as well. Or if you have a cataract, which is like a yellow lens inside the eye. So imagine looking through a yellow window, everything's going to be cloudy and frosty. So that's that. Okay. Now, the back of the eye, which is again governing how well we can see. But for instance, if someone has glaucoma, glaucoma is a condition where they actually get a tunnel vision. So they may see very well centrally, but they may ignore things on the side. Okay. And or for instance, if someone has macular degeneration where they have patchy vision. So in that situation, those are all factors that can affect driving.
Are these sorry to interrupt, are these neuro conditions?
No, these are anterior segment and posterior segment.
Okay.
Now going further back now to neuro conditions. So the most important neuro condition is that visual field aspect, which is the area of vision. Okay. And so the way to think about it is the two eyes are the two cameras that comes together, and then they actually then split again to send the picture to the back of the brain. The right side of the brain control everything to the left. Okay. So sometimes people say, I can't see out my left eye. But what actually happens is that the left half of both eyes, they're not seeing. And that's a condition called hemianopia.
And that's different. That's different to a monocular vision, isn't it?
Absolutely.
That's different to losing one eye. And
Absolutely.
a lot of people we see think, well, how come you can drive easily? Well, not easily, but how come people can learn to drive with one eye?
Yep.
But might find it difficult to learn with a hemianopia. So can we unpack that a little bit more about what the differences are?
So okay, imagine if you close one eye. Now I can still see you. Okay, why? The reason is because in each eye, the visual field nasally actually extends 60 degrees. Okay, so even if you have no vision, you really only lose a little bit of the peripheral vision because you still have vision to 60 degrees. Temporally, you got 90 degrees. Superior, inferior, you got 70 and 80. Okay, so that is why, yes, you can lose vision in one eye, but you can still, with both eyes together, you actually still have the acuity based on your best eye and also the field. So that is why, and I get that sometimes where someone said, I've got this neighbor who's got only one eye, yet he can drive. Why can't I not drive? You know, and it's then important to explain that to them is that there are legal criteria, as we say, but if you get them to use that analogy of covering one eye and yet people can still see, then they sort of understand, I see the issue. Okay. Compared to a hemianopia. Now, as we said before, the eye is the camera, but the brain is the computer. So if your brain is saying, nah, I'm only taking half of the image, I'm going to ignore everything to your left-hand side. So then in that situation, what happens is that each eye, you've lost half of the vision. So you've really only got one half that you are seeing through. People do compensate very well, though, and I think that's where the occupational therapy comes in, which is important, also the adaptive technology, because in the good half of the vision, how can we maximize so that they can then use technology such as mirror, etc., and to use strategies such as scanning so that they can then move their field of vision. And so that's where the neuro aspect comes in.
Celia, I've got a very interesting question that I actually have been wanting to ask you for years and years and years. Can we train, this is coming unannounced, by the way, can we train our peripheral vision to get more focus?
Okay, it's a great question. It's a bit of a holy grail, and I know there are devices and interventions, and in fact, ever since don't quote me the time, but as early as 2006, when I was in the US, in all the meetings, it's a very debated topic. Basically, I think at the time there are devices where, for instance, people can buy, they try to do at home, and they try to stimulate that half of the vision. Probably the best, now I'm married to a neurologist, and he actually say the problem with the brain is that we can't regrow the nerves, okay? So I think so we can't get back what we've lost, but we can compensate for it. So for instance, if I can't move one arm, I will use a different way to try to get and pick up a topic. Similarly, if we can't see that half, the studies have shown that, say, for instance, after a stroke, 10% of people may be very lucky, completely resolve, it's transient, but 1/3 have partial improvement. But they will still always have some deficits with that half of the vision. So the compensatory strategies is to then use the eye movement. So there was a really lovely paper by Susan Tragetto's group in Germany. And with all these devices, he actually had a nice study where there's an infrared camera. And what they've noticed is that the people who, they thought, is it the stimulation that improved people's vision and retrain them? But it's actually because then people learn to move their eyes, just that very subtly. And I didn't realize that until I was getting interested in the study, is that when we read, we actually concentrate on the central 5 degrees. Okay. And that is why it is particularly important that if you just lose, and we then guess the next couple of letters. And while I was doing a talk, there was this fantastic text I have where it says, I can't believe I'm reading this, but then all the words don't make sense, but it's because we then guess the next letter. So even that tiny little 2 degree of shift, it expands your central 5 degrees, and that makes a big difference. So to answer the question, is it neuroplasticity or is it the compensatory movement? And I think it is, in this case, the compensation, but people are very clever to compensate for it.
Yeah, and look, we'll talk about this in our top 3 takeaways afterwards, but I can vouch for that. We can work with clients to retrain their focus from the 2 red lights of the car in front of them to the deficit side alongside that car, to increase that vision going backwards and forwards from the deficit side to the back of the car. There's a lot of studies out there, Celia, that
absolutely
simulators immediately after their stroke or neurological event that's taken out half of their vision in both eyes, and the simulator studies would suggest that it's not safe in a square type of screen in front of them. But through practicalities actually on the road, there's a lot of training strategies that can come into place. And I'm a big advocate for more studies. If you're a driver trained OT or someone who wants to take up studies in this area, there's a lot of PhDs that can come from training in cars, or I believe for the future would make a big difference for people from this day forward. Ali, I know a lot about this kind of stuff. Have you got any questions at the moment?
It's actually really fascinating to me. Not really in regards to engineering, but I have a bit of my own personal interest in kind of neuroplasticity and kind of retraining the brain and those kind of things. And it's interesting because the way I've interpreted what you're saying is there's 2 elements. There's like what you can see, what your eye is seeing, but then what your brain is deciding to show you as well, if that makes sense. And they're 2 very different things. And I'm just wondering if is there, in terms of that retraining or so on, what kind of damage happens, and is there any times where it can be like retrained, I guess, and repractice this, muscle memory or mental muscle memory or whatever it is to get it going again? Or is it just there's neural damage and then definitely you just have to have blocks? Like how does that work, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Okay. And that's a great question. There are many variables in there. Okay. So firstly, is there optimal timing for retraining? And I think this is where, for instance, we need to look at the condition. All right.
Yeah.
Such as after a stroke. Okay. And with Brad being an OT, you probably have noticed that with the stroke units, they talk about rehabilitation, sort of starting early, having the physios, the OTs, the speech pathologists after a stroke. In this situation, again, we need to prioritize. For instance, in some of the stroke, it literally only affects the very back part of the brain called occipital lobe, which is the vision center. The person may feel absolutely fine, okay, and they are still walking, talking, functioning well, but it's just that they've lost that half of the vision, the hemianopia. In those people, then there's definitely a place to going early, but again, the legal ramification is after a stroke. Okay, there is a period of time of about 3 months that they should not be driving. Similarly, for instance, after neurosurgery, there's also that restriction. Going back to stroke, if someone has a very large stroke where it's affecting half of their body, they can't move their arm, for instance, they can't move their leg, then we need to prioritize what is more important. Should we attend to the physical aspect first with physiotherapy? Then, when they feel well enough, then they consider the occupational therapy side. So we really need to look at it at individual case-by-case basis.
Yeah, it's interesting because one thing I'm just wondering also, and how does this conversation happen in the real world? And Brad, I'm interested to hear what you say is, so I follow, I'll give you like a little bit of a story. I follow one guy online who's paraplegic, and he seems to have a very strong belief that he's going to walk again, right? And he's doing all of these things online and demonstrating that he's going to walk again. And you look at it and you think, is he actually going to walk again, or does he have false hope? And is he actually spreading false hope as well? I mean, it's good to be, reaching for the stars as such, but is it also good to spend your time trying to achieve something that's unachievable, if that makes sense? And how do you have those conversations? Like, again, because what I'm thinking about with the brain is, don't know if you've ever heard this guy. There's a pretty famous guy called Jim Quick, and he's a famous guy that talks about he's famous because he was autistic as a kid, and then he trained the autism out of his brain basically since he was a kid, and he has been then going online and sharing and saying, well, you can do this too. But when I look at that, I actually don't think that everybody could do that. And I think maybe this guy's pretty unique, and had pretty lucky. And maybe people thinking that it's possible by looking at people like this Jim Quick could end up wasting their whole lives and have a pretty poor quality of life, if that makes sense. And how do we have these discussions and figure that part out for the person?
I'll actually turn that around, Ali. Okay. And I think, as Brett said, that we're going to have so-called take-home message, and you're absolutely correct that there are a lot of mixed messages and different messages out there. Perhaps one thing that I will stress is it's a stressful time for the person and their families. Okay, for instance, they just had an event, whether it's a stroke, whether it's a large neurosurgery, etc. Okay, I think language is extremely important because it's a confusing time and stress time. And then to have for instance, someone who then has this hemianopia, to have someone coming in and say, you're not to drive. It's quite devastating. We get a lot of panicky phone calls. I think the message there is, in this kind of situation, it's not a black, the motor registration, there is the law side of things. However, don't give up hope. Okay. And also there are process involved where we need to wait that 3 months to see how much natural recovery may have happened. And then at that 3 months, do the formal assessment to see what is your field of vision, what is your acuity, what is your physical situation. And at that point, we can discuss options. And I think options are important. For instance, many people don't even realize that there are occupational therapy driving clinics for this kind of situation. So I think in this type of situation, the message we probably want to get out there is it's a stressful time, but do understand that it doesn't mean you're never to drive again. Okay. The important message is that there will be options available, and we're here to facilitate, to help look at those options.
I think that actually is a really good way to start wrapping up the podcast, because that's beautiful. It goes very much along the lines of what we try and message here with the podcast in general, is that don't give up, and there is always a way, and there's always options, and just keep talking to people and professionals and so on. Like you said, talking to the driver OTs and people like yourself and so on. And yeah, there's always options, and that's really, really good, I think.
Yeah, it is. I agree. That's a great way to wind it up. We want to thank you very much for your time today, Celia. It's been wonderful to have, we say we have experts on this podcast, and you obviously got all the knowledge there that we can tap into, and we want to thank you a lot for the time that you've taken out of your busy schedule to come on board and give some information to our listeners. But we're not going to let you get away without our final question. So just before I ask that, we want to thank our sponsors again one more time for bringing you this show today, Mobility Engineering and Williams OT. Celia, we've learned a lot over this podcast, and we also know that cars are more than just getting from A to B. Is there a special something that you've done in a car, a special trip, a special story about using a car that you would like to share with us?
Oh, that could be dangerous.
Oh.
No. And look, I think you're absolutely right. I think car is not just a tool, but I think this is also, I think when it comes to cars, we all have, we all have our own stories, and whether it is, your first car, whether it is the time you spend with your family or your loved one on a trip. And my most important title is not the professor. My most important title is Alex and Steven's mom. So I would say that with car trips, definitely that's time I learn a lot, because I quietly drive and I can hear all the things in the background. That's so that's one of my favorite times.
Excellent. Great response. And a huge thank you to you, Celia. Hey, for our listeners, if they've got any questions about hemianopias, quadrantanopias, anything that's neurological or anything to do with eyes altogether, what would you suggest is the best place to reach out for more information?
Okay, that's so firstly, I think the healthcare providers are important. So in this kind of situation, it's important to know that you've got a group of people that you can call on. There is the healthcare provider and allied healthcare provider, okay, and then the support services. So these are the three arms. From your healthcare provider, we need to know the actual situation of what caused the hemianopia and the quadrantanopia, the visual field defect, okay, and what's your recovery, what's your other comorbidities. Then that's where the allied health providers such as occupational therapy, driving comes in, okay. And I know, as I said, in this day and age, people get a lot of information, and that's where sometimes the support groups are also extremely quite helpful as well. So these are the three arms that people should tap into.
Excellent. Thanks again. We really appreciate your time and energy today, and we hope our listeners get something out of it. I know there's a few driver-trained OTs that will get something out of it, but we know also that we have a bunch of clients that listen in as well, potential participants on the NDIS or across other fields as well. So make sure you share it with people that might find this interesting, and don't forget to press that like button as well. But as we say goodbye to Celia, make sure that you stick around, because Ali and I are going to do our top 3 takeaways from what we learnt from this episode. So stick around after the break for that. But as we head into the break, we want to thank you, Celia, for all your time and energy today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, welcome back. In this section, we bring you our expert analysis and top 3 takeaways from the interview. This is where we provide our more than 30 years of joint experience in the industry, helping people with disabilities to drive and get out in the community in a safe and meaningful way. So that was a really good interview there with Celia. I thought it was great, particularly for OTs. We've had some really good ones, which give great technical, assistance lately. So yeah, what are our learnings from today, Brad?
Well, the first one that we want to touch on is that there is some really strict criteria around vision for driving, and it makes sense. You need to be able to see potential dangers so you can react to it. But in regards to visual fields, I want to thank her to start off with by explaining what the differences are between certain eye conditions. But for the neurological side of things, for an ophthalmology side of things, especially the neuro-ophthalmology, there's a big difference between monocular vision, one eye vision, versus having half of each eye knocked out, which is called a hemianopia. Hemi meaning, one side, and anopia, inability to see. There's also a quadrantanopia, where you can just have a quarter of each eye blocked out. With that with the connection to the brain, connection to the computer. It's not actually your eyes. It's actually the connection with the computer that's processing it all. So there's a problem with the computer, not the actual eyes. So that's really important to understand. And there's some really strict criteria around it. Look, the best place to go and have a look at the criteria is called the Austroads Assessing Fitness to Drive Guidelines. Yep. Austroads is who publishes it, and it's called Assessing Fitness to Drive. If you put that into a Google search, it'll take you straight to the document. It's a massive document, hundreds and hundreds of pages worth, and it actually goes into the criteria for visual fields. Yeah. So it's really important to go and have a look at that. It is what I reference and what Celia references all the time in regards to vision, but other criteria as well. And it is what the Department of Transport's actually reference as well. So really important document. It's available online for everybody to see. They can get a Word version. I'm actually looking at it now, a PDF version. You can buy a copy if you want a big one, or you can have an online version. Yeah, so Austroads Assessing Fitness to Drive. Go put that into a Google search. It'll take you there.
Maybe we could put a link for people.
We'll put a link in the show notes. Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
That could be something you can put for people.
We know people are listening to this in their car, so don't go pressing the link while you're in the car. Yeah. That's why I'm repeating it so many times. Remember it by the end of the show.
On that note, one thing I remembered is we actually came across this in a previous interview with Belinda O'Connor.
Yeah.
And we spoke about, and she also mentioned how there is that minimum requirements around sight, and that's a very important factor, which particularly we were actually just mentioning this offline. Even people that are not considering themselves within the disability community or able-bodied or whatever, they suddenly get sort of slapped a little bit to reality, not realizing that there's this sight requirement, and they fail that requirement unknowingly. So it's not something that's, I guess, advertised. It's something that I actually learned about today, or remembered about today after speaking with Belinda. So but very important to understand that it's legislation. It's black and white. There's not much you can do around that.
Really quickly, a couple of the key takeaways from what Celia mentioned was that if you have an event, a neurological event, you've got to wait 3 months to drive in case you have another neurological event or it's deteriorating over that time. But it's to make sure it stabilizes. That's the understanding behind that 3-month time. It can be agonizing waiting through that time. And a lot of doctors will say, wait 3 months. And then people just return to driving because they've waited 3 months. You actually need to go through testing at that 3-month stage. So don't go back to driving immediately after 3 months unless you've got the clear from your doctor. Really quickly, couple of key measurements. Minimum requirement for driving is 110 degrees. So 90 degrees is straight down the middle, out to one side. 110 degrees is a bit more, and it has to go past the midline. And 10 degrees above and below. That's absolute minimum criteria to be able to drive. And departments of transport around Australia interpret that a little bit differently. Some will have a little bit of a grey area. Some will have very strict that it has to be that. Also, your central core may need to have specific restrictions as well, so 5 degrees either way. But that's why I'm saying go and have a look at the Austroads guidelines. They're there for everyone to see. Discuss it over with your health professional. If you're on YouTube looking at this, I've got a visual acuity chart at the back there. There's strict criteria in regards to that, as in 6 meters and 12 font on that to be able to have acuity. All of that has to be met before you can go and have further testing. But that leads us into our second point, Ali, and that's options and plasticity of the brain.
Yeah.
And we just want to mention that. Do you want to lead us away with that?
Yeah. So as Celia was saying, that it is, I guess, whilst it's a very small organ, it's a very complex organ and has a lot of different moving parts. And not only you have the lens, but you've got then the communication with the brain, and the brain is kind of showing you what the lens can see and so on. And I guess when you have had any kind of trauma or change, this one in particular is one where there is really no kind of black and white solution, but there's always options, and there's always something that can be, done and so on. Not necessarily options around always being able to drive, but options around moving forward and supporting your new vision or whatever you've got. So
there's a great book out there. It's called The Brain That Changes Itself. It's worth a read if you've had a neurological event. It really is. It's about neuroplasticity. It's about how the brain is like plasticine and that it can be molded and shaped to certain points. We know that it's more plastic in the immediate stages after a neurological event, and there's more plasticity as a child through to early adult years, and then it gets a little bit more, if you leave plasticine out, Play-Doh out, it gets hard and crumbly, but you can still kind of move it to a point that later on in life, if you leave it out for too long, it gets rock solid. It's kind of that type of mentality to how the brain can adapt and evolve, because we know that older people can learn something new, like doing Sudokus or whatever. You can learn something new. It's always learning, it's always changing. So it's a great book. And it's just like our wingless warrior who we interviewed. Go back and have a look at that. No arms at all. The part of her brain dedicated to her feet and her legs is going to be so much larger than my part of my brain dedicated to my feet. Lionel Messi as another example. The area dedicated to his feet, especially his left foot, is going to be massive in his brain compared to my brain.
Yeah. And
the brain adapts and it changes based on experience and what areas it's good at the start of life. Brain's an amazing thing. The other thing I just want to touch on in regards to that, brain's an amazing thing, is the point that Celia made of when you're reading, you really only focus on the central 5%. You're looking at the middle part of the word, and the brain makes up the rest of the word and potentially the rest of the sentence because of experience and what knowledge it's already got. I want to touch on this from an OT point of view, who does a lot of in-car training with people as well. The brain makes up the rest of the visual field as well. Some people will kind of see black, but the more you live with it, the more the brain makes up beyond that midline where it's not really working. So you could be looking at a car, it'll look at half of the car according to the data, but the brain will make up what the rest of the car looks like, even though you can't see it. And it
does that all the time. I was reading something about how, because of the amount we blink, I think our eyes are closed for so many hours a day, but our brain actually just creates the infill picture all the time.
Yeah, 100%. Exactly like that. What the danger of that is for driving, just so everyone is aware, and why this is such a gray area and why testing needs to be done. If your brain makes up the rest of the car, it may not see the indicator that is flashing because your brain's not looking at that area. Or a long way down the road, you can see an intersection. As it goes into the blackened area of your vision, your brain's still making that up and going, I know it's getting closer by all the other data that's further down the road. Your brain's making up the picture in its own brain of what's actually in that side street as it's coming towards you, if you're not scanning towards it and actually looking into it. And there may be a kid that comes out of on a bike out of that side street at the last moment. Your brain is making up that it's all clear, but actually there's a danger coming out. That's the danger of driving with one of these conditions if you're not scanning appropriately. So I just wanted to put that out there so everyone knows what dangers there actually are and why this is such an important area of driving and why there's a whole lot of gray around it. Can we train to compensate? Very good question. It's up to the individual. and research, and departments and areas will say, so no, black and white, too dangerous. Other areas will say, let's give it a go and see if we can train and see if it's safe to do so.
Then that takes us a really good segue to the last point, which is it's a stressful time this time, as mentioned by Celia. And like you just said, there's so many options, so many things to get considered, so many ways to look at this. It can get very overwhelming very quickly, given how, like we mentioned offline, your eyes is kind of like your vision to the whole world. And once that starts getting affected, your brain will undergo a lot of stress in general as a reaction to that. So just being kind to yourself and trying to understand that as a minimum helps you have a much better, I guess, playground or ground baseline to have those best solutions and look at those options with a more open eye.
100%, Ali. Look, we see people that have had a neurological event, and we see them immediately 3 months after it, through to a couple of years down the track. We even see the people that have had a neurological event maybe as they were being born. They're born with it, where they've got a quadranopia or a hemianopia, and it's been there since day dot. They don't even know that they've got the condition. They've learned to adapt right from the start. There's no sign as a parent that there's, maybe early on there was, but you don't even know that there's an issue there. We had a young fella who was the captain of his A-grade football team, playing football, AFL. And it was a captain and played in the center of the ground as a rover, playing football with a hemianopia. He had no idea that he had this condition until he had his eyes checked for acuity, doing the chart behind me, that he had something wrong with his eyes, because he was looking to get glasses to make, reading a little bit easier. And that happens all the time. We've had other people as well who have come in at 40, 50, no idea that they've got a visual field deficit until they get their acuity checked. So that can be a big shock to the system, been driving without an accident, without any issues and so forth, and all of a sudden you don't meet the medical guidelines. It can be a very scary and stressful time. So make sure that you get the right information from your health professionals.
That's it.
Yeah. So look, that probably takes us to our takeaway line, Ali, doesn't it? Which we mention in every single episode, that the information that we present in this episode, and in this episode particularly, but in all episodes, is general in nature. So if you've got any queries about your condition, about what will work for you, make sure you get in contact with your local OT or mobility dealer. But in this case, if we're talking about visual fields and acuity, make sure you get in contact with your health professionals to start off with, get a referral to the eye specialist, maybe a neuro-ophthalmologist like Celia, and make sure that you put yourself in the driver's seat so you know what's going on. Yeah,
and set yourself up with a trial. And one last mention of our sponsors, Williams OT, Driver Assessment Rehab, and Mobility Engineering. Williams OT put all the pieces of the puzzle to assist people with disabilities reach their driving and community mobility goals. And Mobility Engineering is a team of passionate and dedicated people focused on bringing Australia's largest range of suitable transport solutions for all walks of life. So, thanks very much for that, Brad. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, no worries, mate. See ya. Thanks very much.
Cheers, bye.
Thanks for listening to the Drive Able podcast with Brad Williams and Ali Akbarian. If you like what you've heard, make sure you like, rate and subscribe. It really does make a massive difference. If you or anyone you know would like to share a story about driving with a disability, or you would like to get in contact, find the show notes, or find the resources mentioned in this episode, you can find us on Facebook. Just search @Drive Able Podcast for more information.